Hi, it's Mo Bunnell. I'm your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue, and I have a real treat for you today. I can't believe I've never said that before, but it may stick. We'll see. But hey, I just got done interviewing Nancy Duarte. She wrote a book I really loved years ago when I read it called Resonate. And she's got some proprietary methods for how to give talks, how to communicate, how to tell stories, all kinds of IP and training and consulting around how to be a better communicator. And I really like her approaches, and it was a blast to have her on the show. She's the one that you're going to watch and listen to in just a second. And in this first episode that we recorded, we talked about how to use communication at a high level to grow our books of business, to enhance our career, to gain control and be able to bring in the meaty work that we want. And I can't wait to get into it, but before we do, know that if you want our best thinking in how you can grow your book of business, head over to Grow Big Playbook. Sign up, you get a quick download, and you get ongoing tips that are going to help you succeed. That's at growbigplaybook.com, growbigplaybook.com. So here is Nancy Duarte. Hey everybody, it's Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. I'm completely geeked out because I get to have Nancy Duarte on our show today. And we've run across each other at a client recently, and the leadership team was so excited to have her team go through her all of her content around how to give great speeches, how to communicate your messages in ways that connect with on the other side. It's more than speeches, it's about communication. And then they're also going to go through our Grow Big Leader training and our Grow Big training around business development. So, Nancy, I'm just thrilled to have you on the show. And we're going to tape these couple episodes like you and I have prepped so much for. My first big question to you is, what's your big idea on how people with one foot in delivery and one foot in growth, how they can grow their book of business in a way that feels great?
Yeah, that's interesting. That has to feel great. And I hope they're ethical for starters. But, LinkedIn does a study every year about what the biggest skills gaps are in every role. And hands down, the biggest skills gap is the spoken word, oral communication skills, which this also happens to be what we focus on. So I think how you show up, the presence that you have, and how you deliver what the client needs, what you're trying to sell in, will make you just different than, better than, greater than those who can't communicate well. So, of course, that would be my answer, right?
Of course it is, right? But we expected that. Well, this is great though, because we're going to get into some gems where you're going to be able to help people do that better. So, one of the things we talk about is it's really hard for a prospective client to understand that one person's 20% a better expert than another. But it's really easy for them to feel like, do I like them? Do I connect with them? Do they speak well? Do I understand their message? So let's go a level deeper with that skill gap. What would you recommend people do to be better at that?
Yeah, I think it takes practice. It takes understanding frameworks and models in your head. I think people kind of standardize on sometimes a sales methodology or a delivery methodology, and they come across like automatons, like, oh, I'm going to advance you to the next phase. I'm going to advance you to the next phase. So I think sometimes we get trapped in this like train track instead of being more like, helicopters, like adapting to what they say, adapting to what they hear. So it's not just what you say. The biggest part of being a communicator, a strong communicator, is listening and adapting as you go, and then forming your words. Like, I wish people just formed their words. It would solve so many of mankind's problems. Yeah, it really is about adapting, listening, and then meeting them where they're at.
I love that. A lot of times we talk about asking great questions so you can learn their priorities in their words, as opposed to our jargon, which our lingo can come across that way. I
Yeah.
know you're anti-jargon.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Well, what are some of your, I mean, maybe we get a peek beside the curtain because you've got this massively growing business. You're in professional services yourself, like our audience. What are some of the questions, Nancy, that you asked to sort of figure out what somebody's priorities are in their words?
Yeah, first thing we always do is research. So I don't think you come prepared with good questions without having done research. So I don't think there is a pat set of answers. I think because we come from storytelling and consultative chops, I mean, the first thing a salesperson should do if it's a public company is download the 10K, get their head around the strategic initiatives, how this person's going to be measured, take a crack at what they think this role is and why they need your services. So I think this whole concept of empathy is a theme in everything we do, not only in our training products, but also in our methodology itself. Like if our methodology is a Venn diagram, everywhere the Venn overlaps right in the middle is always empathy. And that means taking an empathy walk. That means walking in their shoes for a little bit to really understand them. And to your point, you listen before you ask. So that first question, I don't think that there is the same first question ever. Like it's just different every single time.
Yeah, because if you do ask, what keeps you up at night? Or these just awful stock kind of questions, it shows that you didn't do research, right? Because you can ask anybody that. It's
And you
silly.
should know. Yeah, you should know what's keeping them up. You can look, I mean, there's so much information about our buyers out there, from their social media channels to how their own firm or company's being bombarded by external forces and internal forces. All this information's out there. News, like I always start a news feed when I'm going to approach a customer for a couple months. I just start getting the news feed. So I really understand the kind of pressure they're under or opportunities they have, you know, just before I approach. So there's just all kinds of ways to show up smart.
Oh, I like that. Show up smart. And another thing you said that I think our audience, it'd be easy to miss, and I think it's so important, is when you said empathy walk. I wrote that down and put quotes around it. So you're not just reading the 10K and trying to understand, all the different ratios that we could look at if we were a controller or a CFO, but you're personalizing that to try to figure out how does that impact this individual person. It sounds like. Go deeper on that.
Right, it's understanding them, but sometimes sometimes external people are better students of a culture and a company sometimes than their own employees are. And if you can tie what you're selling to them to a benefit to the company so the company can reach its strategic objectives, or so this person's own career can take off, you have to understand the environment that this person is living in. There's like a lesser known part of storytelling frameworks of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. He had in there, like, put on the skin of your enemy. What that meant was put on their skin, look through their eyes, and see if there's a way to get access, right? So Avatar is like the best example of that. There's Jake. Jake thought the blue people were the enemy, and then he became blue and became their advocate. So like I'm asking everyone, I guess, to put on the skin of their customer, walk in that skin for a while, really understanding the culture, the biases, the roadblocks that are going to be put out. You should know their budgets. You should know how much money they have the authority to spend. It's just, there's so much you could learn before you even make the first phone call.
I love it. Okay, let's wrap up this episode with one last thought, and I want to get to real tangible here. And I know you said there's no stock answer, and I 100% agree, and it aligns everything you're teaching lines up with our book, the Snowball System, and our trainings. But let me put into the skin of I want to be in the skin of you for a second. So let's say the last couple weeks you set up that news feed. You personally got into the skin of somebody that you were calling on. What did that initial beginning of a first meeting look like? Like what, even if you have to paint a little context, what were some of your questions? What were you looking to dig in, to validate, to test, to learn?
Yeah, what's interesting? I have a team that actually does it. Now, I don't do it that much. Now, I have a platform, and so that makes me possibly an anomaly to the rest of the team. But I have found I could reach out to almost anyone on LinkedIn and get a really great and get a meeting. Like I don't do this very often, but someone on my team was like, "Hey, could you see if you could connect to this person and ask for a meeting?" And I did, and it worked. And it was a CIO at a Fortune 40 company, like, and so we got them meeting. So it's a little different. I don't know how to answer it, right? But yeah, the ask is usually one of generosity. So one of our values at my company is generous experts. And believe it or not, we're in a season as a service business where we during COVID, we actually cut clients. I cut out 100 clients. We cut all the way down to just 35 because of the 80/20 principle. So we're focusing on just the 20%, which sounds crazy, but we grew. We exploded because we focused on the 20%. Now the training business, we're just going crazy. That's a completely different model. So I don't know that I have that answer because I sometimes every once in a while leverage my platform. So
Well, but that's something for our audience to learn too, because if you do build a platform, if you do have LinkedIn training or podcast or these other things, being able to invite somebody to be a part of your platform is a great way to get introduction. So it makes sense, right?
yeah, it does. And making great content. Yeah, being a thought leader makes.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Well, super, super helpful. Thank you. So, hey, people are going to they're going to get more of you. They're going to want to devour more of your content. Where should our audience go?
You could go to Duarte.com. I'm at Nancy Duarte on Twitter or at Duarte. And then we also have my page on LinkedIn. And then the company has a page up there. I do connect to everyone who connects to me. So
I love it. Well, thank you. And so, everybody, check this out. This was a meaty episode. We covered a lot. In the next one, you're going to want to hear or listen to that or watch it too. That's where Nancy and I are going to talk about how can we use her concepts to create and close more opportunities. And I really want to get into storytelling in that one. So, hint, hint, everybody, you're going to want to watch or listen to that one too. Nancy, thanks for being on the show.
thanks, Mo.
Hey everybody, it's Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue, and I'm back for our second interview with Nancy Duarte. And we had a hoot of a time in the last one where she talked about how we can use the content in all of her businesses, consulting, training, products, platform building, all the things that she's doing, and specifically how we can grow our books of business. Nancy, in this one, I want to go really specific around winning the meaty business that our audience wants, creating and closing the business they want. What's your best advice to everybody on how they can do just that?
I love this question. Anytime you're speaking to an audience, whether it's sales or you're on a TED stage, the first thing you need to do is think about your audience journey. And what that means is, who are they when they walk in the room, and who do you want them to be when they leave the room? And your role in that journey is one of mentor. You're trying to help them change or the organization change, and you need to define that. It starts with a big idea. That means here's my point of view about the industry, my point of view about your product, my point of view, and here's what's at stake if you do not adopt my point of view. And there's good stakes if you adopt it, bad stakes if you don't. So that whole thing's a lockup. Again, it's the big idea and then the move from, move to. That whole thing is called the audience journey. And I confess that we have had some really huge sales results from this. In the New York Times, Mark Mattson said he made $700 million more by having adopted this methodology, the bigger resonate visual story methodology. And then another guy at a tech company said they sold a 500 million more into their base for having put their team through this training. And so it's really spectacular, and it just changes your mindset by incorporating story and the outcomes, by have everything be driven to the transformation that that person or organization is going to go through by having adopted your product, by having adopted your services, by having adopted your training. They should be changed, or your business isn't doing human flourishing. Like if you're not advancing humankind by what you're selling, that could be a little bit of a problem. But everybody should be.
Well, I want to go deeper around how you help you with that. I'm a huge Joseph Campbell fan, love the hero's journey and really the power of everything that he's done or did. And you've taken that, and I love what you do in the book, Resonate. High recommend for everybody, go out and buy Resonate right now. I love how you've mapped it to our journey as the professionals, and also, as you said, the audience's journey. And you've overlaid specifically how people should feel and experience as they go through a talk, as they go through a presentation, as they go through a communication. So go a click deeper. And let me paint a scenario. Let's say there's somebody in our audience, because there's a lot of them, that are in professional services. They're really high end. They're a senior partner somewhere. They'd like to use communication as a tool to connect with people on a stage. Let's say they're going to speak at a big conference and they've got a high likelihood of their kind of clientele is sitting in the audience.
That's
What do
awesome.
they do to craft the perfect audience journey to display and convey that transformation?
Yeah, I love that you pointed to that body of work. Yeah, Joseph Campbell had a 17-part hero's journey. And I took the work of Chris Vogler, who slightly modified it down to 12 steps. But one of the most important things about the hero's journey is that the protagonist, the hero, actually starts in their ordinary world. Like you look at Luke Skywalker starts on a sandy planet, right? So they start in their ordinary world. Something happens, an inciting incident moves them into a special world. And then ultimately they learn a lot of lessons from the trials and hardships, and they come back to their ordinary world changed. So you need to look at every communication opportunity, especially a staged gig, as an opportunity to enrapture them, bring them into your special world, and then have them leave back in their ordinary world with new tools, new gifts, new special powers. Like, it really isn't about you. So one of the things that happens as presenters sometimes is we feel like we're the central figure in the room. We think I'm the hero, I'm talking the most, I'm well lit, everyone's focused on me. And it's really easy to get lost in feeling like you're the central figure in the room, and you're not. In reality, your audience is the hero. So if you deliver your material in a way that makes the audience walk out the door with it in their head and with it in their heart, you win. If they walk out the door having rejected, having not taken in, having pushed back on what you lose. So really the ones who hold the most power in the room is the audience and not the speaker. So you have to defer to them. Again, it's empathy. You have to be like, you hold all the power, and I am here to serve you, and I'm serving up magical gifts, special tools, things that are going to help you get unstuck. And that's what a mentor does in myths and movies. They bring a magical gift, a special tool, or help the hero get unstuck. That's your role as the speaker. So the presenter is the mentor and the audience is the hero.
Well, you've got a big, well, this is great. I could not agree more. And you've got a big consulting business, you've got a big training business, big product business. Gosh, Nancy, when you think about all the people you help, right, in all these different ways, what are some of the common questions you get? And what are the most important answers you give when people want to do what you just described?
Yeah. You know what? I think common question. So it kind of depends, right? Execs and leaders, like top of their game, CEO level, they have very different kind of needs than an entry level or a data analyst, right? They're very different. So a lot of times from execs, we're like, I need to nail it. So it's either like ego driven, like I want to look like a rock star, or it's like I'm driving incredibly important change and I need to influence people in mass. So we actually ask series of questions, and all of our workshops are based on really incredible job aids where you actually think through and storyboard out a talk, rearrange it, because reconstituting things actually makes them stronger. And I think people pass too quickly, and they even, God, I get so many emails from salespeople where they're not only manipulative, now they're starting to use trickery. Like, I'm just like, wow, wow. Like, I hide every single one of them if it makes it through. But it's just really about deferring to the audience as the hero, understanding with humility your role in their lives, not your role in your own, and showing up as your authentic self. I think people like people that are authentic and not cheesy, not salesy, but really sincere and authentic.
Well, one of the things that you just mentioned, I think so important is it's sort of underneath everything you said, is by telling that story and by giving that presentation with empathy to the audience, you're teaching, giving tools. You are being so ridiculously helpful, right? And say it's a 1 hour talk, they should feel like they're getting 12 hours of value out of it. And I think that's underneath what you're saying, right? That you're really giving away everything you can in the time you've got.
Yeah. And the chatter after, like, well, we used to have water coolers. Now we're all at home, but it should be, I'll never be the same again because I gave this person an hour. Because right now, audiences are making choices. Like, I was speaking once and I was like, oh, I got to stop right now because what just happened? Because like 50 people came into my session and someone's like, oh, someone tweeted that you were doing a good job. I was like, because it was South by Southwest. I'm like, wow, one person tweeted I was doing a good job, that means like a bunch of other people left a session. They didn't think it was worth their time to stay an hour. So people will get up and leave. So you need to be there as the one who has something that's going to help them get unstuck.
That's right. And if they're not physically leaving because you're not getting value, they're mentally leaving and they're
Yeah.
thinking about
I
what
do an email. Yeah.
yeah. So one last question in this episode, because you touched on something that's so important. You talked about how important it is to be for us to all be our authentic self. What's your definition of authenticity, and how do people show that authenticity in the real world?
Yeah, I think the best way to be authentic is to use a story structure when you communicate. Because the thing about a three-act story structure is there's this likable person, hopefully that's you, who goes through these hard times, which everyone does. Life is hard. And because they went through this tough time, they emerge transformed. So many people think they have to show up at work buttoned up, perfect, unflawed, like all together. And someone who's authentic would be like, life's hard. Here's how I dealt with this. Messed that one up, but I learned from it, and it's just a completely different thing. I think sometimes like leaders, I just talked about this recently, leaders sometimes show up as armadillos, right? They've got this hard shell on the outside, this protective armor, but really, really underneath it all, when an armadillo uncurls, it has a very soft underbelly. And I think part of it is letting people see your soft underbelly and not being afraid that you'll get hurt if you're your true self. That's what that means to me. And best way to do it is to be a storyteller and to tell stories. And that connects emotionally and mentally. It connects people to you. It makes you stickier. Like they'll stick to you and they'll remember you with a well-told story. We just launched a storytelling fundamentals course that teaches you the 7 story beats that transform people. So that's a good one for salespeople, to put little units of story into their sales pitches.
Oh yeah. So well let's close out this episode with that. Where do people go to either get that course or just learn more about Duarte? Where would you tell them to go?
Yeah, so you can go to duarte.com. We have a newsletter you can sign up for. LinkedIn is good. Twitter is at Duarte or at Nancy Duarte. So yeah, all the goods.
Perfect. Nancy, thanks for being on the show. And everybody, check it out. There was tons of value in this one. Nancy practices what she preaches. In the next episode, I can't wait to ask Nancy what's her best advice on how we can deepen relationships. Nancy, thank you.
Thanks.
Hey everybody, it's Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue, episode 3 with Nancy Duarte. I'm having a ball. And if you didn't catch the last 2, I want you to go do it, because I asked Nancy, what's her best advice to grow her book of business? We got really specific around creating and closing more opportunities. And Nancy, in this one, we've prepped, you know what the question's going to be, but what's your best advice to people about how they can deepen relationships in an authentic way?
I love that. And my answer would be using story. Now that we can hook up fMRI machines to the human brain and see what's happening when a story is being told, it's really spectacular, because the more sensing parts of the brain are lighting up. So that means people are sensing and feeling your content, not just listening to it. But the other thing that happens is the story listener and the storyteller, our brains are synchronizing in the exact same parts of the sensing parts of the brain. So it's like they tick together at the same time. So it's a really powerful way to feel a sense of connection between two people. In my own culture, which I realize this is more about sales, but in my own culture, we have Speak Up, which is a story night, an evening where we tell stories. And then I have story night here at my house where employees, we just sit around a campfire, we just tell stories and tell stories. So if the pursuit is to bond or create a bond, the best way to do that is through stories. And there's specific stories I think everyone in sales should know. And one of them is the origin story of the company, like why it started. It's not like about us, and then there's these executives, and we have this beautiful building. It really is about why someone was called to make a difference in the world. So if you don't have a great origin story, you yourself as a salesperson should have a calling story. I am called to work here because this product, or I am called to work here because this service changes lives. That's why I'm called to do what I'm doing. Like that kind of passion. People know when you're passionate about what you're doing versus just doing it for a paycheck. So there's a set of stories that you should have in your repertoire, not only of your own calling story, but about how your product or service helps others get unstuck. And you should have a collection of stories like that.
Well, Nancy, this is so rich. You reminded me of a study. I think it was Dr. Veronica Bollinger in France that did a functional MRI machine story, or not a functional MRI machine story, but she hooked people up to functional MRI machines as they heard stories. And the thing that stuck with me was like in a story about a young boy that kicks a soccer goal for a goal with his left foot. As they're reading that part of the story and somebody's hearing it, the part of the brain that controls the left foot is lighting up. Talk about connectivity. So we become part of story. So I just couldn't agree with you more. So question back to you, what are your top, like you mentioned the origin story and the personal calling story, what are the other stories people should have at the ready and rehearsed and really, really authentically ready to convey to somebody else?
Yeah, I love that. So I would say that these calling stories or origin stories, those are reason to believe stories. Like you want to tell them so they believe. There's stories you tell just to bond, like literally just to bond, to snot, laugh, to cry, like just to feel together. Then there's stories to influence and to persuade and to actually bring them from one point and transforming them to another point. Those have very strong moral lessons, very strong. The mentor came along and helped you get unstuck, kind of a thing. So you got yourself unstuck. That's those kinds of stories. And the other kinds of stories are coaching stories. These are stories you tell one-on-one situationally. And I think every salesperson should have a huge bag of those, which is like, oh, you're in this situation, here's a story. Oh, you're in this situation, here's a story. And you can build those based on all the ways your customers get stuck. And you should have a shared library of them. Now, the interesting thing is when you're telling stories, there's I stories, we stories, and they stories. So an I story is first person. It's like, I went through this. And you can tell a story like that from a place of great conviction because you were there and it is you that experienced it. You can describe it in great detail. And a we story, like I could talk about being on this podcast with you because I was also there. Those two types of stories are, you're telling more like a testimonial. I mean, you're telling your own story. But a they story, like that person used our product, that person bought our services, those are a little more distanced and you're a little more dispassionate. I would say you need to embody that story and it's more of a performance. So if an I and a we story is a testimonial, a they story needs to be almost like a performance. Now by performance, I mean, you need to walk in the shoes of that story and you need to tell it from a place of conviction and with as much color and interest and excitement as if you were the part of that story, because the passion kind of dims when you tell a they story. So make sure you're telling, able to tell a story from a place of conviction. Just super will help the way it
I
comes across.
love this. Well, I totally agree. Yeah, in how it comes across. And one of the things that I think is important that we see in our classes, I'll bet you see it in yours, is from time to time people will say, gosh, I shouldn't practice telling stories or whatever because then I'm not going to be able to be genuine. And we think the opposite's true. The more you practice, the more you can actually insert genuineness and authenticity. Your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. So it's so funny. In January every year, we have our big dream vision talk. And we used to do it on Dr. King's Day because that was a way to honor him. And we would do our I Have a Dream speech. And we gave everyone else their own birthdays off and to celebrate Dr. King. So anyway, I felt like we would recap the previous year and I had all this great news. I'd be like, and we did this and we did that. I'm all excited and animated. And so I hired a coach, one of our own coaches. We have these freaking brilliant coaches, speaker coaches. And I said, I just feel like that's applause worthy and they should self-applaud and help me. And she's like, Nancy, it's all how you tee up. And then when you pause, you got to pause and then you state it. And like she just worked each one. She crafted the order to do it, and how to frame it up to get the right emotional reaction I was hoping. So I took my whole deck, I tagged where I thought people should feel and what I thought they should feel based on the information in the deck. So she shaped each one of them. I can say this, I guess, because I'm the presentation lady, on an internal talk, there was so much applause that I actually went 5 minutes over. That's really big deal. Like, it was a real big deal for me. So you can say all you want. Like, I consider myself a pretty professional presenter and storyteller, and I even need a coach to help me shape things in a way that gets the visceral reaction that the whole reason I'm sharing it is to elicit a response, a positive response or a warning response. And even I was struggling to see the response from my team I was hoping to. So yeah, hired a coach. So just
Yeah,
wait.
yeah. I just love what you said. And if we tie back to the headline, the idea of this particular episode, deepening relationships, I'll bet because you did hire that coach, because you did translate this information should be that feeling, and then you did all the things that you just shared, I'll bet you deepened your relationship with every single person in the room. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. That's like influencing at scale. That's the kind of persuasive stories that every leader needs to tell, because the toughest talks I give are the internal ones, because everyone there is like, oh, she's going to make me change, you know? So
Yeah, yeah.
that to me is better than, different than even meeting with customers. It's just different. So
Yeah, I'll tell you, it stresses me out to think, giving it, we give a lot of speeches. I do, I don't know, several a week, but I would have a harder time speaking in front of your group than I would
exactly.
like a couple thousand people for a keynote. I'm like, oh my gosh,
I
these
know.
experts are really going to judge me.
If I do my own slides, I start them with caution tape all over them, like caution. Like, or sometimes I just, if I have to do my own slides, sometimes I don't use them because my designers will check out because they cannot compute. It is ugly. I cannot compute. So yeah, a
Pressure.
lot of pressure.
Well, Nancy, this has been just chock full of value, like our past couple episodes. Everybody, in the next one, I'm going to ask Nancy her best advice on how do we hack our own habits to stay focused on the business development stuff while we're so busy doing the delivery stuff. But before we do that, Nancy, before we say goodbye, tell people where they should go to get more of you and your organization's content.
Yeah, I just remembered I have a website set up for specifically podcasts. You can go to duarte.com/Nancy, and there's a ton of free resources, tons of free stuff there for everybody. And then at Nancy Duarte on Twitter, or at Duarte on Twitter. And I do connect everyone on LinkedIn, and my company also has a page where we post articles and stuff too.
Very cool. Nancy, thanks for being on the show. And everybody, if you like this one, I know you did, the next one about hacking habits is going to be interesting. Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, Mo.
Hey, everybody, it's Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue, episode 4 with Nancy Duarte. Nancy, you've been killing it. Everybody, if you didn't hear or listen to or watch the last 3, please go and do that. Nancy, on this one, I want to ask you sort of a big question. All of our audience has one foot in delivery. They've got one foot in growth. The same human being has to deliver or oversee a big services contract or deliver some kind of professional services, but they also have to think about the next client, the next matter, the next project, the next retention, the next ancillary product, whatever. What's your best advice on how they can stay focused and continue on the growth path while they're busy doing delivery?
Yeah, it's such a rock and hard place thing to situation to be in, right? Because you have to do your best work when you're trying to deliver your highest and best work, or you won't get repeat business, right? But then you also have to spend all this energy that's almost completely opposite of that, building and proactively like having time cleared on your calendar to specifically do this thing. And by the time you've delivered, you're all exhausted. Like it's just exhausting. And so we're a big calendaring culture. Like we block out time, block out thinking time, scatter the right kind of thinking time. Pretty much everyone knows when their best and finest energy is for this type of thinking and planning and outward calling and following up. But when you're doing both, we call it the shiny ball syndrome, right? Where it's like you're trying to get this thinking done, this selling done, these things. And it's like, oh, I could do some delivery stuff. Like it's like, oh, and it's hard to stay focused. And so one of the things, like I mentioned in an earlier episode, is we trimmed out all clients that weren't partner like, so that when we actually spent our energy following up and doing more like client care, client services, the big brands exploded like unexpectedly with just a little bit extra rubbing the genie lamp. We're shocked at the scale of the genies that are popping out of our most highly valued, lamps. And so I just think that the distraction is the enemy. I think we're just a culture of distraction. And so calendaring, I think, is the best habit to form, and know when your best work is being done and do your best work then.
Well, that's a great wrap to sort of the focus on your energy and your time. But which I think we've hit that really really well. I want to go deeper though on the focusing on the perfect client, because I think these two things go hand in hand. So you mentioned that you'd culled down your clients to be I think from, I don't know, a couple hundred. I think you said down to 35, something like that.
Yep.
There's a half a chapter in Snowball System, and we do a full module in our Grow Big training around targeting or figuring out exactly who you're for, figuring out exactly the perfect client and what are the criteria that match up with that, so that when you make big investments, you're doing it in the right place, not on the whatever shiny ball bounces your way. So let us peek inside Duarte a little bit. How
Yeah.
did you figure out who your top clients were going to be, who you're going to make those big investments in?
Yeah. So first thing we did is profile. So we have two different sides of the house. One is the more consulting house, and that's the one where we culled all the way back to 35. And then the other side of the house has hundreds and hundreds of big clients that we serve. So it's really interesting. I had two leaders at the time. One was in client services and the other was in sales. And I tasked them with this. And it was so difficult because it was so counterintuitive to them. And then they kept being like, well, I couldn't cut it to 35. I got it to 70 or whatever. And it was very interesting because one had to stack rank where it would be the highest value on the training side, the more outbound salesy team. She had to stack rank the ones that were like where she wanted her team to make the highest and biggest bets of their time. And then the other one had to trim. That was very, very hard and couldn't do it. So finally I had to come up with a framework for them to do it in. And it was the highest, the highest potential and the level of saturation or penetration that we already had. So who had basically, it was a 2x2. I mean, 2x2 grid saved the day every time. So we
They
did it
always do, right?
2x2. And we moved. We actually literally started putting brands in and putting their names in the 2x2. And we kept all of the ones that had the highest probability of higher sales and were at the lower level of saturation, which happened to be mostly some of the bigger brands. And what was interesting is we have one client. I've been in business for 32 years, and we've had this client for 32 years. And it's like the most successful brand in the world, if I just put it out there. But I can't say the name of it because then it'd be breach of contract. So most successful brand in the world. And it always had hovered around 2 million. And the people that ran the account, it's just always, that's all that's ever there. It'll never exceed that. It'll never be bigger than that. And I'm like, well, I think, like I did all this work and I figured out what groups we were in, what groups we weren't, which isn't really the CEO's job. I'm like, I think it's a $6 million account. I think we have a defeatist mindset. And I actually think this oldest account is our highest potential account. Challenged them, and we've doubled it. This year we're doubling it. And that, I just said that like end of last year. So it's really about coming up with the right rubrics to understand what is the potential in these accounts and then just blasting it up. So it's hard work. I know it's hard to be the delivery team and the sales team. I think that's probably the most challenging kind of role to be in. And I think a lot of love and care and excellent, like friendly skills that help you bond to them. and honest communication is what will make them keep coming back and back and back for more. And it makes selling it in easier when it's based on a relationship and the quality of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I really like that. There's so many nuggets to go deeper on. I think what's interesting as you talked about the two by two is
Yeah,
you created that framework for the team to get unstuck, right? Because it's human
yeah,
nature for anchoring science to sort of say it's been 2 million, it's always going to be 2 million, as opposed to saying, no, 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 how can we help this? How can we serve them? How can we help them achieve more than they ever thought they could? Obviously it
yeah.
involves you, but that was really insightful. So I'm interested to just go a bit deeper on that. How did you determine, was it, potential? You had that one axis that was potential of the client opportunity. Was that a
Mhm.
thumb to the wind, or did you have sort of some kind of mathematical formula, or what did you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's total addressable market for either, like, so you could look at and know who the competitors are, just start to ask around who else is here, who else
Yep.
is in the account as a competitor. Also, what divisions have you penetrated versus not? And of the ones you penetrated, is it just a thin layer that we've won, or did it go deep? It was also a lot about opening up doors for this other side of the house, this training side of the house. So if this service business side is using us like crazy and admires our work, how hard was it to ask for a referral? And if we owned the communication training at a brand, how do we decide what the addressable market is for that? So it's like, I try to do this like dystopian utopian scenario planning. It's like utopia. You have all the money in the world, you have the biggest sales team in the world, you have access to every resource in the world you would ever need. How big could this account be? And the interesting thing is I let them adjust it as we go through time. Like, they don't have to keep it at that, but they have to defend why it can't be that big. It's just was an interesting and different mindset as a service business, to take that on that way. So now we size everything up, and then we keep and we track it. And then they would have to petition to say, I don't think this can be $1 million account. You have to say, okay, why? Okay, why? Okay, I agree. Those are all really great reasons why. But the second there's an executive change, the second there's an acquisition, the second there's a merger or some other startling thing that they find in the 10K, they need to be right back up there resizing it again. So there's just so many things that can make what was something that was yesterday not be true for tomorrow.
I love that dystopia utopia idea because we're also anchored on what the present is, what they've done last year, what they're doing now, and you're creating specific language to get somebody to think about. No, 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 just don't forget about that for a second. What
Yeah.
what could it be? And I really like what you're doing there, because once that unlocks in somebody's mind, then they can think, well, what do we need to get there? A referral, whatever else, pop, 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 and all of a sudden we're on a new transformational journey, right?
Yeah. Selling in different products, getting more buyers of the same. I mean, there's just so many ways to scale. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I love it. And the key was unlocking people, unlocking their minds to what could be. Nancy, this has been an absolute blast. Where should people go to get more of your content, to learn about your training programs, your consulting, and everything else?
So you can go to Duarte.com, and then there's a special site I set up, Duarte.com/Nancy, for anyone who listens to anything I have to say. There's free stuff up there. At Duarte on Twitter, at Nancy Duarte on Twitter, and I do connect to everyone who connects to me on LinkedIn. And the company has a LinkedIn page too. So that's about it.
Lots of ways.
Yeah.
Well, I'd encourage everybody. Let's all go to duarte.com/Nancy, because there's cool stuff to download that you can't get anywhere else unless you hear it on something like this. And I also can't recommend enough the book Resonate. Go out and buy it. Buy it right now. It's amazing how Nancy and her team have mapped to the hero's journey, the storytelling, and super cool little tips like how brevity is important, having star moments. I'll let you read the book to learn what that is, everybody. But just a lot of things that you can use your entire life, and a lot of things you can put in practice right away. So go out and buy Resonate right away. Nancy, thanks for being on the show. I've had a blast. I had high expectations. You exceeded all of them, and I
Um,
know it's just the beginning.
Thanks, Mo. It was good to see you.
Hey everybody, it's Mo Bunnell, your host here at Real Relationships, Real Revenue, and I just had a ball recording 4 just meaty episodes with Nancy Duarte. She's She's a CEO of a consulting firm, of a training company, best-selling author of books like Resonate, one that I really liked. And she teaches people how to communicate better, how to communicate one-on-one, how to communicate in small groups, how to communicate from the big stage, how to tell stories that connect. And in our broad-reaching interviews, these last 4 episodes, if you didn't catch them, make sure you go back and listen to those. We just covered so much ground. And in this episode, I'm going to recap the biggest things that I learned from Nancy as we were talking. So before we get into it, know that if you want our best thinking on how you can grow your book of business, grow your relationships, and grow your career, then head over to growbigplaybook.com. That's growbigplaybook.com. And you can download in an instant, right after you sign up, the 8 key beliefs that you need to have in your head to be successful at business development, sort of a business development operating system for your mind, if you will. And it's powerful stuff. You can read those 8 beliefs in about 8 minutes. I tested it myself, and you can get a ton of value out of that. It takes a few seconds to sign up. You get the instant download right away. You really can't go wrong. Go over there to growbigplaybook.com and check it out. You will not be disappointed. It's fantastic. Put a ton of time into it. All right, so here are the big things. I actually should say the big thing that I really learned from my interview with Nancy. Not only just to have a blast, she's a gem of a person, but what really struck me is how one thing threaded through all 4 episodes that we talked about, and it was empathy. That one thing, empathy, threaded through everything. And I want to give you 3 examples in this video about how you can use empathy to your advantage. First example, a first meeting. If there's one area that I hear from our clients that they have a transformative change from before they go through our programs to after, I think it's the first meeting. What I hear over and over again is so many people in a first meeting, whether it's a first meeting with a new contact or it's with an existing contact, but a first meeting about a new offering or new topical area, something that they could hire you for example. There's some newness to it. So we'll think of our first meeting. I'm doing this in air quotes if you're just listening only, but let's think of first meeting broadly. First meeting can be the first time I've met somebody. There's newness to the human to human relationship and also the topic. Or a first meeting can mean I know the person, but this is the first meeting on a new topic. Typically something they could hire us for. Here's the before and after our programs. The before is what almost everybody does beforehand is show up ready to talk about themselves, not always, but typically with a big long PowerPoint that's all about their organization or the solution or whatever. And they're ready to talk about them. Let's call that lack of empathy. Now let's think about the after. After our programs, we teach people to, of course, have a goal in mind. Be very clear. Be cemented on the intentional and realistic destination. How far can you move and help this person in this meeting? So we're concrete in the way that we think in where we're headed. We want to test that with the client ahead of time, of course. But we're going to be flexible in how we get there. And we're going to use, if there's ever been a compass for how we do it, I hadn't thought of it this way before, but it's empathy. So our goal in first meetings is typically to get a second meeting. It's not to close the deal. It's not to get the client to say, yes, I would love to hire you or that solution or that thing, that product, that thing you talked about. But rather our goal in that first meeting is follow-ups. If we're truly thinking with empathy, if we're truly thinking in terms of being 100% helpful, our mind isn't about closing the deal. Our mind is not about getting a yes for the completion of the entirety of the thing. I want to hire you or your product, your service, your solution. But rather, what we're trying to close, if we will, what we're trying to get a yes, is that we're being helpful and the client is excited to get our help. Helpful follow-ups might be a video training you can send somebody. They might be a book you can send. They might be an introduction to somebody who's dealt with the exact same thing before. It might be an analysis, what we call a give to get, something that we're going to get some information from them. We're going to run an analysis and we're going to give them the results of that at no charge as our investment in their success. These are the kinds of follow-ups that you can look for. Follow-ups usually come in four big flavors: technical follow-ups, stepwise or procedural insight kind of follow-ups, relational follow-ups, introductions to other people, or big idea follow-ups. We're going to have a brainstorming meeting, or here's a summary of a new idea, or even here's a TED Talk that has a new way of thinking about something that relates to something we discussed in our first meeting. Those four kinds of follow-ups hit the four major ways people think, as we know by the Herman Brain Dominance Instrument, some great intellectual property owned by Herman International that shows the four major ways that people think. So good follow-ups are generally going to span all four or have sort of a bias towards one of those ways of thinking, but they're going to be framed in a way that the client's really excited about getting, because A, it's helpful to them because it relates to some part of the discussion, and B, it's going to be sort of biased towards the way that they think. When we leave a meeting with several, 3, 6, 9 follow-ups, we have a winner. All those follow-ups are going to result in something good down the road. If nothing else, it's going to be a great relationship and a killer start to that relationship, even if it doesn't mean something commercially or transactional for a while. No problem. Great relationships turn to commercial success over time. The problem is if we enter that meeting not thinking with empathy, if we're thinking about selfishly, if we're thinking about our goal, our thing, what we're trying to accomplish, what we're trying to sell, and I mean that in a bad S-word sell kind of way, in a negative tone, a negative sense, then we're likely to be pushy, we're likely to be scripted, we're not likely to be inflexible, and we're not likely to be listening in the way we should with empathy to find the follow-ups that we want. So that's our first example, is a first meeting. The second example I thought was really interesting that came up in the conversation with Nancy was the idea of story. And I worked with a client recently, a person named Josh, love Josh, and he shared some research with me that story is the most memorable way of communicating information. And the research that he had read compared it to metaphor, which was second, and then facts and figures and process steps and sort of left brainy technical things are by far the least remembered things. So if you think of a great interaction you had with somebody 10 years ago, you probably won't remember facts and figures from that conversation. You're not going to remember they shared 3.4 was the answer. Maybe you'll remember a metaphor they shared. So it's something's like something else. But in that greater interaction, you probably remember a story they told. And in the second thing that were covered in this episode, my conversation with Nancy really brought back that research in my mind that Josh shared with me. And it also brought back that research that I shared in the episode by Dr. Veronica Bollinger that found that functional MRI machines measuring the blood oxygenation in people's brain showed that when people are listening or reading a story, the part of the story, if there's some kind of action, physical action in the story, the part of the brain that's firing up is the part of the brain that controls that part of physical action that's in the story. So if there's the story about this young boy in a small town in Guatemala, he's playing soccer on Sunday afternoon in his town, in the town square, and he kicks the game-winning goal for his school with his left foot as it slowly goes over and has contact with the soccer ball, and he watches it with his eye as he follows through and the ball goes into the net. Is that story's read or listened to, the part of the brain that lights up is the part of your brain that controls your left leg and your left foot. And a story elicits feelings of action, of basically the five senses, any part of the five senses, then that part of the brain fires like a pinball machine. Back to empathy for a moment. Boy, you talk about connecting with somebody. I'd never thought quite in this exact way, pulling everything together as I did after my conversation with Nancy, but this idea of story being a way of connecting with empathy with somebody else. If we tell our stories the right way, they are connecting with us in an empathic way, and we are connecting with them in an empathic way because we are sharing that moment. and both of our brains are firing in the exact same way at the exact same time. And maybe that's why, one of the reasons why story is so connective and why story shows empathy. We're both feeling the same things in the same moment. Almost as if we watched a play or a movie or a really stressful moment in a sporting event, we're bonding with people that we're in those situations with, because we're almost watching a story unfold. And I think telling story is a way to create that. So Nancy's advice was get great at your origin story. Get great at a product story. Get great at a story of how you helped clients in a similarly situated situation that you're communicating with. Rehearse and think through stories so that you have them at the ready. And telling stories, like anything else, you get better over time if you do it more and if you do it deliberately and you're always trying to improve, deliberate practice, so to speak. So I think having a bank of stories is important, and always practicing and improving them is important. One takeaway you could do right now is make a list of the kinds of stories you would like, that the kind of ways that you would like to, with empathy, connect with clients. And start with the list of the types of stories, then fill in the kind of stories that you want to really rehearse, memorize, get great at. Boom. Then just get better, try them out first, and get better with them over time. I think this idea of a library of stories is really important. The third thing that we talked about with empathy is just generalized communication. And I thought Nancy had some really good techniques that she mentioned. I thought of some other things since we recorded this. And the things that I've really been thinking about since during the conversation with Nancy and afterwards is that we communicate best, and she mentioned this, something around these ideas, that we communicate so well, we connect so well with empathy when we have we kind of stories. We kind of stories, as opposed to I or they, are so powerful, because if there's a story if there's any kind of communication where we're sharing we did something, we have two big positives from that. One is we can tell that we can communicate that message from our own perspective, because we were there, we're part of the we. But if we include our clients or our partners or others that the person we're communicating with can relate to with empathy, if we can choose other people within the story or communication method that are like them, now our we, let's say it is a story, now our we story of how we saved the day with a client, where we picked a client that really relates well, or that the person we're communicating with, the prospect, they could see from their perspective with empathy, back to empathy. Now, in a way, we're harnessing both of the first two ideas into a third. And in a way, we're not only communicating with empathy to them through the story idea, but because we're choosing a we story, they are listening with empathy, almost as if they're along for the ride with us. And I never really thought of that before. So this is a subtle but important point on that second idea of telling story, is that if we can not only have a library of stories, but pick them where the we in it, us and our clients, let's say, or us and a partner or whatever, that if we can pick the other side of the we and pick those in a way and frame up the story in a way that the listener can relate to those people, now we're sitting side by side, marching forward together. And I think that's really interesting. I'd never thought in my life, my whole life, I've never thought of the difference between I stories, we stories, and they stories, the way Nancy said it. And I just particularly locked onto that we idea, whether it's a story or something else. I think that's really powerful. So let me close with this. Empathy. Boy, is it huge. It threads through every part of the snowball system. You know, where we teach people not only how to do business development, of course that has benefits to them, growing their book of business, their relationships, and as a result, their career. Gaining control of their lives is the thing that I want to help people do. That's the meaning I find in life, is really at its core is helping people succeed and helping them gain control of their lives. Because if they gain control of their relationship ecosystem and their career, because they can grow their own book of business, then they're indispensable. I hope you can relate to that. And it all starts with having a technical expertise, but also bolting on business development to that. That's what we care about. The crux of that is always serving other people, always being proactive, and always helping your client succeed. And I think that's really powerful. That's business development with empathy. That's serving with empathy. That's being helpful with empathy. Always changing your communication, always digging in and being helpful, always being proactive with the people that are most important to your success, and doing it in a way that always has their backs, always has their best interests in mind, and always helping them achieve their goals. It's sort of funny that I think the more you help others achieve their goals, the more goals you can achieve. I'll close with that. I hope you enjoyed this. I really liked my interview with Nancy. I hope you go back and listen to those 4 different episodes that we recorded together. She's a gem of a person. Go out, buy her book, Resonate. Sign up for all their free stuff at duarte.com/Nancy. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I can't wait to see you in the next round of recordings. Talk to you soon.